Shalom Aleichem, friends. We're reviewing Likutei Sichas, volume 27, the Sicha on Pesach. And this is about the idea of a fifth cup. We know we have the four cups, but if you look in Shas and Gemara and then in Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, there's a concept of a fifth cup, and it's an interesting thing. We find this interesting in Judaism that a lot of times there's a number, but then there's another number. There's 49 days of the Yom, but there's 50. There's 39 lashes, but it's really 40 minus 1. And this is Yiddishkeit. It's complicated. So there's four cups, but there's a fifth. It's possible that is because there's four languages of redemption in the Chumash, and then there's a fifth one, Ve'ivesi, which represents the future coming to Eretz Yisrael or Mashiach, and therefore it's a fifth. Didn't happen yet. I don't know. But this is a discussion today based on Rambam's approach to this fifth cup. So we're taking a look at the Rambam. This is Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah, the last chapter, chapter 8. And in this section, in that chapter, the Rambam gives you basically a guide for the Seder, starting from the beginning of the Seder, all the way through to the end. And he delineates all four cups, right? First, drink a cup of wine and make Kiddush and drink it. Halacha 5, after the Haggadah, conclude with the blessing of redemption, Asher Alanu, etc. Go al Yisrael, and drink the second cup. And then recite the benching, third cup, and then the fourth cup is said over Hallel and drink it. And then Rambam says you should not taste anything except water throughout the entire night. And then the Rambam continues, and he may pour a fifth cup and recite on it the great Hallel, but this cup is not obligation like the four cups. So this is interesting. You gave me four cups, no, but there's a fifth cup that is not an obligation like the other. So this is problematic, and it's curious. It's problematic because he just said you're not allowed to drink anything a whole night. One line before, suddenly you're allowed to have a fifth cup. And what is it about, this fifth cup? So the commentaries are divided on this. Some say it's reshus, it's optional. That's the opinion of Rabbi Manoach and others. And some say it is actually recommended, mitzvah min hamufchar. Again, these are opinions in how to read the Rambam. Let's discuss the two opinions. The optional opinion means, Rabbeinu Manoach and many others, that the Rambam is really saying it's allowed if you're thirsty. It's not that there is a value to taking a fifth cup from a mitzvah perspective. No. We know you're not supposed to drink anymore the rest of the night, but let's say you're thirsty and you want another cup of wine. Maybe you're sitting there for a long time, you're singing songs, you're having a farbrengen. So at some point you want to drink another cup. We're going to allow you to drink another cup if you recite the Hallel HaGadol, the great Hallel, as opposed to the ordinary Hallel, which is said over the fourth cup, right? The Hallel HaGadol, which is Hodul Hashem Ki Tov. So yes, it makes it an allowance. You need another cup. Do the Hallel HaGadol and do another cup. That's okay. It's an optional. It's an allowable thing. But really, there's only four cups. That's it. Done. But that's how they read, and that's the language. V'yesh lo limzog. That's the language of the Rambam. He may pour a fifth cup. You're allowed to. It's a concession. But then the Ran says no. The Ran reads in the Rambam. But the Rambam holds it's recommended. Mitzvah min hamufkar. This is a better way to do the mitzvah. 4 cups is great. 5 is even better. That's how he reads it. And this would make sense because the language of the Rambam is this cup is not an obligation like the 4 cups, but it shows that it's some form of obligation. It's not just optional. If we go with Rabbeinu Manoach, that this is just an allowance. If you're thirsty, we let you, and we're giving you like we're an allowability. So why does it say it's not an obligation like the 4 cups? It should just say it's not an obligation. This cup is not an obligation, period. So clearly the language indicates that it is a form of an obligation, but it's not on the same level as the 4 cups. And therefore, the approach would be that this is actually part of the mitzvah. It's a mitzvah min hamufchar. It's recommended. You can do it. You should do it if you can, even better. And if you go that way, if you go like the Ran, that would mean that the Rambam is doing this based on the opinion of Rabbi Tarfon, you see. In the Tanoim, in the Mishnah, The majority opinion is that you drink 4 cups. Rabbi Tarfon is a lone opinion that says that you should have a 5th. Now, normally in Torah, when there's a majority, that becomes the halacha. And even though all the opinions are holy, etc., but the halacha comes like the majority. That's it, open and shut case. However, there are exceptions. In our lives, the exception is, for example, Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin, even though halacha is like Rashi, it's still a concept and it's brought in Shulchan Aruch, and that you should do it. Similarly, in this case, Rabbi Tarfon, even though he's a lone opinion, it is something that's brought in Shas. The Talmud talks about it, and they kicked it around and how to do it and when to do it. So clearly, it wasn't just a lone opinion that it goes into the books, but it actually should be taken seriously, and therefore, and that would be the reasoning. Approach 2, the Ran's approach, that the Rambam says it's recommended. Mitzvah min hamufchar, it's better. Don't do 4, do 5. Like this, you also covered the bases, all your bases. You covered the opinion of Rabbi Tarfon. So these are 2 ways to look at this. And the Rebbe comes along, and the Rebbe says, let's analyze it. It's hard to learn the Rambam either approach. It's hard to say that the Rambam aligns with Rabbeinu Manoach, who says that this cup is only optional, it's reshus, because then the language should have been, it should have been a much more language of reshus, of allowance. It should have said, if you want, you can pour another cup. It doesn't say if you want. The language is v'yesh lo limzog. I translated he may pour, but it probably could also be translated he ought to pour. Doesn't say he's obligated to pour, but he ought to pour. V'yesh lo limzog. That doesn't sound like it's a total allowance. Plus, it says this cup is not an obligation like the 4 cups, but it's some kind of obligation. So the entire line of the Rambam doesn't seem to fit well, says the Rebbe, with Rabbeinu Manoach. If this is totally allowance, you're allowed to. The language should have been, and if you want, you could drink another cup. That would have been perfect. He doesn't say that. He says, "V'yesh lo limzog." You could, you should, you ought to do another cup. It's not an obligation. And he emphasizes it's not an obligation, like the 4 cups. There too, he should have cut short. It's not an obligation, period. No, apparently it is some kind of obligation, but it's not on the level of the 4 cups. So for all of these reasons, for all of these languages, the Rebbe doesn't want to accept the approach of Rabbeinu Manoach, that that's what the Rambam says about the 4th cup, about the 5th cup, that it's merely optional. But to align it totally the way the Ram thinks, the Rambam will hold that the 5th cup is mitzvah min hamufchar. The problem is, Rambam doesn't write that. So many times in Rambam, he would tell you, this is the mitzvah, and it's the mitzvah min hamufchar. This is better. That's the language, that's the jargon. This is a preferred way of doing the mitzvah. He does not say that. He's like dancing around it. You may do it, or you should do it, but it's not an obligation like the 4 cups. So why don't you say it straight? The straightforward way of saying it is, it's a mitzvah min hamufchar. It's better. It's mahadran. So therefore, the Rebbe says, where does the Rambam fall? How do we read the Rambam? He clearly doesn't hold it's optional, but he clearly doesn't hold it's mitzvah min hamufchar, because it would have said so. So what is this? So the Rebbe basically splits the difference. The Rebbe says somewhere in between these 2 views of Rabbeinu Manoach and the Ran. And the Rebbe says something very, very novel and creative. The Rambam holds, this is aligned with the Ran, that this is a recommended. It'll make the mitzvah better. It's not just about optional. You should do it. So the language v'yesh lo limzog means you ought to pour. You should do it. But why doesn't he say mitzvah min hamufchar? Because this cup stands alone from all the others. That's something very creative, says the Rebbe. You don't drink it. You don't drink it. That becomes the Rebbe's explanation. The 5th cup is recommended. In that way, he's reading the Rambam like the Ran. But not like the Ran. The Ran holds there's 4 cups, and then there's a 5th. Mitzvah min hamufchar. He says, no, it's poured, but it's not drunk, which is a very, very novel approach. It's a huge chiddush of the Rebbe, but you're going to see he proves it from the Rambam itself. But first of all, what is gained by that? What is gained by that is that the Rambam, it makes sense. That's the best way to say this language. You ought to pour it. Nowhere does he say to drink it. But he doesn't call it mitzvah min hamufchar. He can't call it mitzvah min hamufchar because mitzvah min hamufchar means I'm doing a mitzvah and I could do that mitzvah even better. But you can't compare it to the mitzvah of the 4 cups. It's not the same mitzvah. Those 4 cups are drunk. This cup is not drunk. It's a new category. It's like a new thing. You know, the famous example of mitzvah min hamufchar is by Hanukkah. That some say you should light 1 candle and some say you should light 1 per person. And mitzvah min hamufchar, the best way to do it, that every person goes up every night another candle. It's the same mitzvah and it's now growing. But here, it's not the same mitzvah. There's a huge distinction in that the first 4 cups, hello, they're drunk. That's what happens with cups of wine. You drink them. This 5th cup is a strange bird. You pour it and you don't drink it. So you can't say mitzvah min hamufchar because that is a term that applies when the same mitzvah has now been expanded or beautified. It's done completely differently. And the Rebbe says that we find this concept of pouring a cup and not drinking it. It's not totally novel. There are cases when we, for example, use a cup on benching and we don't drink it. If someone is doing their Shabbos meal, Shabbos afternoon, and it goes into the night, the halacha is that when they bench, they should not drink that wine because now it's after, what am I saying? I'm sorry, Friday afternoon. Let's say Yom Tov is leading into Shabbos. Let's say Yom Tov is leading into Shabbos. I apologize, I'm complicating this too much. The Rebbe says that Friday, after having a meal Friday afternoon and it extends into Shabbos, you bench on the cup, but you can't drink the cup because now it's time for Shabbos. So you just bench on the cup, it's just sitting there. And then later you use that same cup for Kiddush, then you drink it. So there's a concept of a cup sitting there. There's another example that we saw by the Rebbe himself. Every Yom Tov, the Rebbe would have a farbrengen, the end of the Yom Tov. This was true Rosh Hashanah, Simchas Torah, Pesach, and Shavuos. 4 times a year, the Rebbe would have Kishel Bracha. Why? Because the farbrengen would finish, and the Rebbe would bench, and the Rebbe would use a kais and lead the benching with a kais. But he didn't drink the kais. Why can't I drink the kais? Because it's Matzah Yom Tov, and you didn't make Havdalah, you can't. Then they would have it. Might have, and the Rebbe would make Havdalah on that kais. So we saw this with our own eyes that that's how you do it. So there's a concept of a kais sitting there, and you use it. The Rebbe would lift it up and hold it throughout the whole benching until Bnei Yerushalayim. There's a value. I'm doing benching on a kais. I can't drink it. Okay, it's not unheard of in Judaism, and therefore says the Rebbe that's going to be the Rambam's approach, and this covers both opinions. You see, the reason why it covers both opinions so well. You see, if you we're trying to cover both opinions of the sages who say 4 cups, and Abtafron who says 5. If you drink only 4 cups, you didn't cover Abtafron's opinion. If you drink 5 cups, like the Ran would tell you to do, you covered Abtafron, but maybe you didn't cover the sages. The sages say 4 cups. And we know that when the sages say 4, you can't add to that. But if says the Rebbe, the Rambam says, you ought to do a 5th cup, but don't drink it. Just pour it. Look at the language of the Rambam. And now you pay tribute to Reb Tarfon's approach, but you didn't undo the fact that you're following the sages. You're still only drinking the 4 cups. Alternatively, the Rebbe says even more, this might actually be Reb Tarfon's opinion, not that Reb Tarfon held they should have a 5th cup. Reb Tarfon himself said that the 5th cup is a pseudo obligation, and maybe for whatever his reason is. And therefore, maybe Reb Tarfon himself wasn't about that you should drink it, but maybe you should just pour it. But either way, same difference. It's poured and it's not drunk. Notice how the Rebbe goes through it in the Sicha. All of the 4 cups, the Rambam makes the point to say you should drink it. He doesn't say it once. You'd say he makes a bracha. Of course he should drink it. Why not? No, he like the and then a second cup, and you should drink it. I underlined it. Third cup, drink it. Fourth cup, drink it. Suddenly here, Rambam forgot to say drink it. No, the Rambam's language is precise and perfect, says the Rebbe. This is not a crazy deal. And therefore, we see clear from the Rambam, it jumps off the page in the same chapter. He says 4 times, drink it, drink it, drink it, drink it. Then he says, pour it. He doesn't conclude to say drink it. And therefore, you don't drink it. And therefore, it aligns with the sages, but it pays tribute to the Abtarfin. You pour the 5th cup to pay tribute to the Abtarfin, but you didn't contradict the sages. Or the Rebbe's alternative way, that even Abtarfin himself didn't mean that you should drink it. That was what he really wanted. Just pour it. But the 5th concept, maybe the 5th language of redemption, what have you, but don't drink it. And the reason why this is also amazing is, so first of all, because it doesn't contradict the Rambam's prior line. Without the Rebbe's explanation, which is a chidush nifla, it's an unbelievable novelty. Without the Rebbe's explanation, these 2 lines in the Rambam, which are one after the other, are a direct contradiction. First, he says you drink a 4th cup, and afterwards you're not allowed to taste anything except water throughout the whole night. And the next line, and by the way, you could drink a 5th cup. It makes no sense. But according to the Rebbe's approach, he never said to drink it. He said to pour it. And this is why the Rambam, again, so this is why it's not like mitzvah min hamufchar, because it's a separate mitzvah. The Rebbe in the Sicha explains in detail when it says mitzvah min hamufchar, the example he brings is Hanukkah. As said earlier, the same mitzvah just expands and expands. It's 1 candle. Now it's 1 candle for every person. Now it's 1 candle for every night. But here, no, the 5th cup is not on the same track as the first 4. The first 4 normal cups, you pour them and you drink them. The 5th cup, there's no drinking. So you can't say mitzvah min hamufchar. That mitzvah is being done better. It's a similar mitzvah, etc., but it's not mitzvah. It's not the same thing. It's a cup which is not an obligation like the 4 cups. That's the language of the Rambam. As we said before, that means it's some form of obligation, but not nearly on the same level, and you should just pour it. The Rebbe points out that there's another major difference between the 4 cups and the 5th, which is the further reason why you can't say mitzvah min hamufchar, which denotes that this is just an extension. And what is that other difference? If you look in the language of the Rambam, at each of the first 4 cups, the Rambam makes a point to say that there is a bracha that goes along with it, besides Bara Pri Hagafen, which he says by each one, and he doesn't say it by the 5th. But each one, it says there's a bracha that said. The first one, he said Kiddush, I underlined it. The second one, Birchas HaGeula, Asher Ga'alanu. The third one is Birchas HaMazon. The 4th one is Hallel. There's a, I'm sorry, and then not just Hallel, but you finish that with the Shiro, Yishtabach. So each one of them has a bracha that they close with. These are 2 major differences between the 4 cases and the 5th, according to the Rambam. The 4 cups you drink, and the 5th you don't. And the 4 cups go along with the languages chaysim bebracha. You need to conclude with a bracha, which is a big deal in Judaism. You finish something with a bracha, and then you drink the wine. The bracha of Kiddush, the bracha of Gal Yisrael, the bracha of benching, and the bracha of Melech Yachid Chaya Olamim. Suddenly, the 4th cup, there's no mention of it. If you look at the footnotes, you find out that there are other opinions that say that if you do the 5th cup, you should have a chasim of a bracha. You should have a bracha involved. The Rambam doesn't say it. And therefore, the bottom line is that for all these reasons, this is not a mitzvah min hamufchar. This is like another type of mitzvah. It's an add-on, but it's totally different. You don't drink it, etc., etc. And this makes sense of the position of the Rambam and the precision of his language. So what do we walk away with from this? That the Rambam's concept of the 5th cup By the way, this is not everybody's opinion. If you open up the Code of Jewish Law, it talks about the fifth cup as an optional. If you're thirsty, say the Halal Gadol, you could drink a fifth cup. There are other opinions about this, but clearly the Rebbe is concluding that the Rambam's is that this is a concept of it's not about optional and about being thirsty. It's recommended. It's special. It's some form of obligation, and therefore the language would be v'yesh lo limzog. And again, not he may pour, but the language of translation would now be he ought to pour. He should. He could and he should. And now, but don't drink it. And therefore, so the takeaway from this would be that Rambam holds that the Kois Chamishi, the famous fifth cup of Rab Tarfon, the famous fifth cup, is a form of obligation. Not on the same level as the first four, but it's a form of obligation. Now that we have that, says the Rebbe, let's talk about the subject of the Kois Shel Eliyahu. There's a discussion. Is the Kois Shel Eliyahu the same thing as the fifth cup or not? We find that the discussion in the Gemara and the Mishnah about this fifth cup, but we also have discussion of Kois Shel Eliyahu brought down in Svarim. Are they one and the same? And there are some who believe, some authorities that believe that the Kois Shel Eliyahu, and this is a conventional opinion, and there's some bona fide opinions that hold like that. It's brought in Talmei HaMenhagim, it's brought in the Maharal says it. That what? That they're really one and the same. This Talmudic concept of this fifth cup, which has never been resolved. We already see how complicated it is. You have the Rambam, you have the others, and you have those who say it's optional, those who say it's almost optional, it could be optional. It's a complicated business. Therefore, we don't know. So we're going to wait till Mashiach comes, till Eliyahu Hanavi comes, and we'll answer all the questions. And that's why it's called the cup of Eliyahu Hanavi. So therefore, according to that, it's one and the same. The Rebbe says that the Rebbe's approach is that it's not one and the same. They're two distinct things. We're going to see, according to the Rambam, certainly, but even according to the halachas, the Shulchan Aruch, the fifth cup and the cup of Eliyahu, they can't be the same. They're not the same. And here's the different things that the Rebbe shows to prove that. They're two different concepts. First of all, if you look in the Code of Jewish Law, the fifth cup is discussed in chapter 481. That that if you finish the four cups, and if you're thirsty, that's the approach of the Shulchan Aruch, and you want another cup of wine, you can have a fifth cup in a pinch. You should say the Halal Gadol. But the cup of Elijah is already discussed in a prior chapter. So clearly it's separate. First of all, it's in two different chapters, not just two different chapters. It's in a separate chapter. It's in a prior chapter, you see. It's not an outgrowth. Since there's a concept of an optional fifth cup, and et cetera, so then we added a cup of Elijah. No, it's written before. It stands alone. It indicates that the cup of Elijah is separate. Also, the different names. One is called the fifth cup, and one is called the cup of Elijah. Why would he give it totally different names? Also, the language with regard to the fifth cup is that you may. We already know the Shulchan Aruch would read that as meaning you may optionally, and the Rambam would read it as you ought to. And that it's recommended and it makes the mitzvah more beautiful. But either way, the language is that you may. Whereas, which means that not everybody's doing it, by the way. Whereas in the cup of Elijah, the language of Halacha Shulchan Aruch is, it's customary in these lands. That means everybody does it. So that's a striking difference. So far, the Rebbe, in this section, we're analyzing the Shulchan Aruch, actually. When it comes to the fifth cup, he says, you may. It's an optional thing. When it comes to cup of Elijah, he says, that's what you should do. Everyone does it. It's a custom. Very different. Also, this is a major difference. That the fifth cup, if you do it, it's for every person, just like the first four cups. The cup of Elijah, there's one on the table. So how could you merge these two? So the Rebbe maintains, the Rebbe wants to suggest that the fifth cup and cup of Elijah are two separate things. This he's proving separate and apart from the Rambam that we just explored. This is just in the Shulchan Aruch. But the Rebbe says if that's true, the Rambam certainly concurs with that. We just finished saying that the Rambam holds that this fifth cup is recommended. It's not a full obligation, but it's not just an optional thing. If you're thirsty, it doesn't do with thirsty. It's a recommended thing. It's making the mitzvah better. It's getting Rabbi Tarfon covered. If that's the cup, if that's the case, the fifth cup is like a shikol mitzvah, whereas a cup of Elijah is customary. It's only a custom, and therefore the two are separate and apart. So the Rebbe now accomplished, in addition to the first part of the Sicha, most of the Sicha, showing the Rambam's opinion clearly on the fifth cup that it's a recommended thing. It's not an optional, but it's a recommendation. It's a positive. You should do it if you could. You ought to. It also, and that means for every single person. However, bottom line is it's separate from the cup of Elijah, because this is a cup that's recommended. Each person should do. You should have 5 cups, not 4, albeit not drinking the last one. Cup of Elijah, that doesn't do with you. The whole table has 1 cup, and it's customary. It's not. The Rambam clearly would fit very well. The Rebbe's conclusion on Rambam would fit very well with this conclusion of the Rebbe based on the Shulchan Aruch. So bottom line, the 2 cups are separate concepts. So then the end of the Sicha, the Rebbe says, let's look at the Chassidus. What's this thing? Yiddishkeit is such an interesting thing that it's never cut and dry. You got the 4 cups, then there's an extra. There's not 1 extra, there's 2 extras. There's a 5th cup for everybody, and there's another cup of Elijah. And one is HaPesach, a recommendation, not an obligation. And one is a custom. One is done for everybody, one is done for the table. The Rebbe makes sense of all of this. So the Rebbe says, first of all, there's something in common between these 2 cups, and there's something different between these 2 cups. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. What's in common? They're both not an obligation. They're both an option. The Rebbe says in Judaism, this means that it's a higher level. A mitzvah that every Jew is capable of reaching and attaining, the energy that comes from it, the divine light, the hamshacha ruchni, the divine light which comes from that mitzvah, becomes an obligation. Every Jew is capable of accessing that energy. Every Jew must do it. There's certain higher energies not every Jew is capable of accessing. It's very high. You can't really access that level, and therefore it can't be an obligation. It becomes rishus, becomes permissible, becomes non-obligatory. It's similar to what it says regarding Ma'ariv. Tfilas Ivus Rishus, the nighttime prayer, is not an obligation like the other 2, for whatever the reasons are. And it's explained in Chassidus that really it's a higher level than the other 2. At nighttime, it's dark and it sweetens it up. The word Arvis means night. It also means sweetness, that it's not an obligation. You kidding? It's even greater. That's why it can't be an obligation. You can't oblige someone to reach a level which is not attainable. And therefore, when Judaism says it's not an obligation, sometimes that means it's much greater. Parenthetically, this could be similar to the fact that we wear Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. It's not an obligation. But the Rebbe made a big deal about it, and it's explained that Kabbalistically it's a huge thing. It's fantastic. It's beyond. And that's the reason why we don't make a bracha on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, because a bracha means bracha miloshin hamshacha. I make a bracha, I draw down the energy. This energy is not drawdownable. It's beyond. I access it like an antenna. I make myself open to it. But it's not something that any neshama, any person, avodas ha'adam, the person's service can attain. It's almost like the 50th level beyond the 49. You reach the 49, and then the 50th shows up. But you can't attain it. It's gifted, so to speak. And that's similar, I'm saying, mitzvahs that you don't make a bracha, like a Rabbeinu Tam film, or something that says the head film, we don't make a bracha in our minhag, because Kabbalistically, the head film is so beyond the energy that we are able to attain that we can't make a bracha. It's not like a bracha means I can access it. You can't access it. You can do your part, and then sort of it shows up from above. It's a gift. It's a gift from above. So both of these cups are the non-obligatory level of Yiddishkeit, which Chassidus says is above obligation. It's not something that you can attain, and you're accessing the unattainable, the greater light. Both are also not drunk. Again, according to the way the Rebbe learns the Rambam, the 5th cup isn't drunk. Cup of Eliyahu is not drunk. Again, to drink means to internalize, to access, to relate to fully and digest. You can't drink this. You look at it. It's a higher light. So in this, they both have something in common. However, there's a difference between the 2 of them. Number one is the fifth cup. This is the main difference. The fifth cup, the Rebbe is going to explain, even though it's beyond the attainable levels, which traditionally is the 4 levels. I don't know if that aligns with the 4 Olamis. I don't know. Atzilus, B'ri, Yetzir, Asiya, or the 4 levels of the soul. And the 5th level being Yechida, I don't know. But there's a concept, there's the 4 and then there's a 5th, which means you reach the 4 and then there's a 5th, which you cannot fully reach, but you can access it. It becomes available to you as a result of your 4. So even though level 5 is not attainable, but it's still called level 5, that means it comes after 4. You can't say that it's unrelated to your avodas Hashem, to your service. You do 4, the 5th will come. A little bit like you did the 49 days, Hashem gives you the 50th. So it's beyond, but it's not totally beyond. Whereas when we say the cup of Elijah, which represents the Amunah that a Yid has in Mashiach, this is in the essence of the Neshama. This is not a higher level of the Neshama, it's the Neshama itself. If I'm right that the 4 and the 5 could be the 4 or 5 levels of the Neshama, we know famously the Rebbe said so many times that the Neshama has 5 names, but then there's the essence of the Neshama that's beyond that. That's why the language is Chamisha Shemes Nikrula, that the Neshama was given, she was given 5 names. But then there's the she herself, which is beyond names. So bottom line is that the cup of Eliyahu is a much higher thing. It's the essence. It's not a highlight, it's not an infinite light. It's essence, it's the Neshama itself. And therefore, says the Rebbe, we find something fantastic. That the 5th cup, which we should do, based on this Sicha, based on the Rambam's approach, that it's recommended, and the whole thing with Rab Tarfon's opinion, why don't we find people doing it? Pour it and don't drink it. The Rebbe says in a footnote that the Rambam himself didn't do it. The Rambam's son, Rabbi Avraham ben Rambam, testified that his father himself, who recommended this, didn't do it. Which again is a seeming problem to the Sicha, according to those who read that the Rambam holds that it's optional. It makes sense he didn't do it. But the Rebbe holds that the Rambam is saying that it's recommended. So why didn't he do it? The Rebbe addresses it in the footnote in a second. But bottom line is the Rambam holds that this cup is recommended, and we have a lot of sources for that, as explained at length, to cover our bases of Rab Tarfon. And yet no one does it. Most people don't even know that it exists. When it comes to the cup of Elijah, which is only a custom, there isn't an opinion in the Shas, there isn't an opinion that says you should have it. And yet, not only it's a custom, it's universal custom. Who doesn't know about the cup of Elijah? Every Yid. It's like reverse the Yotzers. Says the Rebbe, but now we understand it. Since the 5th cup represents level 5 after 4, it's a very, very high level. In our generations, people are on that level. So we don't play games. We don't do things that are out of reach, for the most part. And the Rebbe says in the footnote, therefore it's possible. That's why the Rambam himself didn't do it, because he was a Nasi b'Yisrael. He was a leader of all Jews, and he did that in deference to all Jews. He didn't want to do something which is out of reach for most Jews. And certainly in earlier generations it existed. People were on a high level. In later generations, the custom is almost all but gone. Because who's on level 5? However, when it comes to the concept of Emunah in Mashiach, which really means the Emunah of Yechidah Shebenefesh, and this essence, shouldn't really say Yechidah Shebenefesh, we're talking about higher than level 5, the essence of the Nefesh, which every Yid has, and the Rebbe explains in many Sichas, and Chassidus explains that as we get closer to Mashiach, and on one hand, generations decline, but on the other hand, the essence is more pronounced for 100 reasons, partially because of the challenge of the Golus. The essence of a Yid is more pronounced in the later generations than in the earlier generations, and therefore, on the one hand, the 5th cup is not customary at all. The cup of Elijah, everyone does it every single year because it's universal. It's a neshama thing, especially in the later generations. And therefore, says the Rebbe, that also makes sense with the other difference that the 5th cup is for each person, because it's a personalized journey. Are you on what level are you on? Are you level 4? Are you level 5? The 5th, the Eliyahu cup is one cup. The language of the language of the Shulchan Aruch, that the kois echad l'chol ha'mesubin. The Rebbe says, again, this whole last section is on the Chassidus level. One cup, the concept of oneness, on that level, it's like all Yidden are exactly the same. If you have a neshama, you have it. It's one cup. It's one, the whole family has it on one level. And it's really one unit, which is the concept of Emunah and Mashiach, and which will be brought about through this Emunah.